The white mistresses of southern plantations held a power that was invisible yet unbreakable, shaping the lives of the enslaved in ways that were quiet, subtle, and relentless. Every day, inside the walls of grand houses with polished floors and curtains drawn against the sun, they exercised authority over routines, gestures, and even thoughts. Their control was not through open violence alone, but through an omnipresent surveillance that dictated behavior down to the smallest detail. The enslaved learned quickly that one glance, one hesitation, or one misstep could bring consequences both immediate and long-lasting. Silence became a language, careful observation, a survival strategy. In the kitchens, hallways, and bedrooms, enslaved men and women moved as if underwater, adjusting every motion to match an invisible standard, constantly gauging the mistress's mood. There were no written rules, only expectations, often contradictory, constantly shifting, known by intuition and observation, enforced through subtle threats, sudden disfavor, or emotional punishment. The mistress's authority extended to every aspect of domestic life: chores, clothing, diet, access to warmth or comfort, and even moments of rest. Favoritism was a weapon, creating tension and distrust among the enslaved, while sudden punishment ensured obedience and submission. Over time, this invisible power became a psychological force as potent as any whip, teaching the enslaved to internalize control, to measure their own thoughts and movements against a standard they could never fully understand. Diaries, letters, and household notes revealed that mistresses meticulously documented perceived offenses, complaints, and observations, showing that much of this authority was deliberate, calculated, and maintained even without the knowledge of the male master. The house mistress, in her elegance and poise, became a figure of fear, her judgment absolute within the domestic sphere. Even when the master was present, she could assert influence over decisions about punishment or protection, ensuring that her subtle authority went unchallenged. Children of the enslaved learned early that obedience was not just a rule, but a survival mechanism, absorbing lessons of vigilance and caution that would shape them for life. Families lived in quiet terror, knowing that the mistress's mood could determine separation, punishment, or temporary favor, instilling an anxiety that seeped into every interaction. The psychological toll was immense. Self-doubt, hypervigilance, and internalized fear were constant companions, and dignity was a fragile, precarious thing. Within these walls, domination operated invisibly, teaching that control need not always be seen to be absolute. Generations of enslaved people experienced this subtle cruelty, and those who survived carried with them an intimate understanding of the pressures and dangers of domestic life. This silent, pervasive control became part of the architecture of the plantation itself, shaping social dynamics, family relationships, and individual behavior. Scholars studying plantation diaries and letters emphasize that this form of power was deliberate and deeply ingrained, an essential mechanism through which the mistress maintained order, authority, and social supremacy. What appears as elegance, refinement, or gentility in historical records hides a far darker reality: a methodical, psychological system of oppression, meticulously maintained and silently devastating. The enslaved remembered not only the chores and punishments, but the ever-present gaze, the invisible rules, and the subtle manipulations that constrained every thought and action. Their experiences show that oppression was not only enforced through visible brutality, but also through psychological mastery, a constant shaping of behavior, emotions, and relationships. Every polished floor, every hallway, and every locked door in the plantation house reflected this invisible hierarchy. Survival required reading moods, predicting reactions, and living in a state of careful calculation, a constant negotiation between fear and necessity. In these domestic spaces, the house mistress became both a symbol and an instrument of systemic cruelty, wielding power silently, strategically, and with devastating effect. Her authority demonstrates that oppression can operate in unseen, intimate ways, leaving scars that endure long after chains are broken. The stories of those who endured this control reveal resilience, adaptation, and the hidden struggles of those whose labor, obedience, and spirit were regulated by a quiet, omnipresent hand. The elegance and refinement that history often praises mask a profound system of domination, one that shaped mental, emotional, and social realities for every person under her command. While plantation masters might have controlled the fields with whips, it was the mistress who ruled the house with a trail, precision that could break hearts, spirits, and futures without ever raising her voice. And in that silence, the enslaved learned the meaning of fear, obedience, and survival. The power wielded by white mistresses did not end at the edge of the household. Its influence stretched into every corner of enslaved life, shaping relationships, dictating survival strategies, and embedding itself deeply into the social fabric of plantations. While the master's authority was visible, public, and often exercised through force, the mistress's dominion was invisible, intimate, and psychological. She controlled who received food first, who could rest, and who was subject to subtle punishments that no outsider would ever see. Her favoritism created hierarchies among the enslaved, fostering competition, distrust, and resentment, ensuring that the community itself became a mechanism of compliance. Children, observing and absorbing the mistress's moods, learned to navigate fear, loyalty, and the perilous balance of obedience. Every glance and gesture mattered. Every perceived misstep could lead to humiliation, isolation, or separation from family members. Diaries, letters, and oral histories show that this subtle control extended to shaping moral codes within the enslaved community, reinforcing the mistress's authority and ensuring that her power persisted even in her absence. She became the invisible arbiter of safety and danger, deciding who would thrive and who would suffer, often without overt display of force. This quiet tyranny left emotional scars as deep as any physical lash. Generations of enslaved people carried these invisible chains within their minds, learning to measure every word, every movement, and every thought against an unspoken standard. Some mistresses were meticulous in documenting transgressions, using private records to justify harsh treatment or to manipulate both enslaved people and household staff. The psychological environment they cultivated ensured that obedience became ingrained, that fear became instinctual, and that resistance was measured, calculated, and dangerous. Historical accounts reveal that some mistresses leveraged their social isolation, boredom, or jealousy to exert disproportionate control. Using subtle intimidation, emotional withdrawal, or social manipulation to dominate. Their cruelty was often cyclical. The constraints of patriarchal society limited their public authority, so within the domestic sphere, they exercised power over those most vulnerable, turning societal limitations into a mechanism of oppression. The enslaved internalized these lessons, navigating a labyrinth of invisible rules that govern every interaction, every expression, every aspiration. Even acts of minor defiance could result in disproportionate consequences, reinforcing the mistress's omnipresence. Over time, the accumulation of small, continuous pressures shaped mental, emotional, and social realities for entire communities. Psychological studies and historical analyses suggest that the trauma from this invisible control was compounded by the unpredictability of punishment, the threat of family separation, and the constant need to anticipate the mistress's whims. Survivors' narratives recount living in perpetual tension, learning that survival required not only physical endurance but also emotional agility, constant observation, and careful management of appearances. This nuanced form of oppression demonstrates that power does not always require violence to be absolute. The mistress's authority was exercised through control, observation, favoritism, and subtle intimidation, creating an environment where fear was omnipresent and compliance became instinct. Even after emancipation, the psychological and social legacies of this hidden control persisted, affecting family structures, communal trust, and personal identities. Scholars now recognize that understanding the totality of slavery requires attention not only to overt brutality, but also to the invisible systems of domination that shape everyday life. The elegance and refinement attributed to Southern ladies in history, textbooks obscure the depth of their domestic power, the subtle cruelty they administered, and the enduring impact on those who lived under it. As we uncover diaries, letters, and oral testimonies, the portrait becomes starkly different, a world where survival depended on reading moods, predicting silent punishments, and navigating an ever-shifting landscape of emotional and social control. The story of the white mistress reminds us that oppression can be intimate, pervasive, and psychologically devastating. Her power, wielded silently and meticulously, left indelible marks on the minds and hearts of those forced to live under it. Even today, descendants of the enslaved recount the generational consequences of these hidden hierarchies, proving that history's subtler cruelties are as significant as its more visible horrors. Understanding this legacy challenges us to see the full complexity of oppression, to acknowledge invisible systems of control, and to honor the resilience of those who endured them. It is in these quiet corridors, these shadowed rooms, and these unseen rules that the true scope of domestic power becomes clear, a reminder that history is never only what was written in public records, but also what was lived, endured, and remembered by those whose voices were long silenced. In the silence of these homes, the invisible chains were forged, resilience was cultivated, and the human spirit was tested in ways both subtle and profound. The elegance of the mistress masked a calculated authority, and the enslaved carried the weight of it in their daily existence, a testament to the enduring impact of hidden power. And though the masters' names dominate records, it is the unseen influence of the women of the house that left traces of fear, adaptation, and survival woven into the very fabric of plantation life, echoing across generations and demanding recognition, remembrance, and understanding.